class. You did a really nice job of talking about the Articles of Confederation last week. It was just as good of a discussion as the one that you had on the Declaration of Independence. You definitely did a great job of identifying the weaknesses of the Articles. And what I really appreciated too about the conversations that you were having one another is that you did a great job of connecting the weaknesses within the Articles of Confederation and talking about how there were fears of an all too powerful government. And you connected them to the present and talked about how, within our political thought today, there's still concerns about how powerful the federal government is and the relationship that exists between states and the government. So, as you can see, even though this was a significant discussion that we were having in the nation over 200 years ago, it's one that still continues to be discussed today, obviously in different, more modern ways, but it's still present. Today, we're going to move on to talking about the U.S. Constitution, which went into effect in 1789. You're going to see as you go through the unit, the Constitution addressed some of the concerns about the weaknesses in the Articles of Confederation. So let's take a look at what the lesson looks like this week. You have our unit objectives. We are going to be talking, as I've noted, about the U.S. Constitution. And really, this is going to set up how we look at issues throughout the rest of class. The U.S. Constitution is obviously central to our political thought. It informs how we think that our federal government should function. It informs what powers that we believe belong to the federal government and which powers we believe belong to the states. And it also informs us of what our individual rights as citizens are. It's not a week goes by if you're watching nightly news or weekly news, if you turn to CNN or Fox News or MSNBC, someone, somewhere, every day, if not every hour of the news coverage, is going to bring up your rights as an American. So it's important for us to understand what those rights are, uh, how they're outlined in the Constitution, and learn how we interpret the Constitution, how the Supreme Court justices interpret the Constitution, and what impact that has on our understanding of politics today. So, at the end of this unit, you should be able to describe the contents of the preamble and the articles to the U.S. Constitution. Indeed, the U.S. Constitution is so important and so central to our political thought that we're actually going to spend a number of weeks on it, and we're going to break it down and really look at it in depth and understand the historical background of the document and the impact it has on our beliefs today. You're going to be able at the end of this unit to explain why the founders believed in the separation of powers. You've already got a taste for that when we talked about the Articles of Confederation. Many of you brought up the historical example that the reason the founders were so adamant that there be a weaker central government was because they were thinking back to the time that they were under the power of Great Britain, which honestly at that time had only been a few years ago, or really the nation was just starting out. So it was very fresh in their memories, and they wanted to avoid a too powerful central government. And so the solution for that is going to come in the separation of powers between the executive, the legislative, and the judicial branches of the U.S. government. You're also going to be understanding how the founders viewed their role in creating the Constitution. Did they think that their own words were the be all end all, for example? Or did some of the founders believe that the Constitution needed to be a living, breathing document, one that changed as new issues came into play in United States history? And finally, you're going to talk about the ways in which the U.S. Constitution differed from the Articles of Confederation. And I think you're going to have a pretty easy time with that as we go forward. Because, like I said, you all did a great job of talking about the weaknesses of the Articles last week. So, from there, let's move on to the reading assignment. There are a number of items to read this week. Some are articles that will take you outside of the class. Others are blurbs that are going to give you snippets of thought from the founders. So obviously, probably the most important thing you're going to be looking at uh, this week will be the Constitution itself. If you click on the first link, it's going to take you to the Charters of Freedom, which comes to us courtesy of the National Archives. You'll see a transcription here. You can read the transcript and go through. You'll notice that there are links within this document. This takes you to various amendments within the document as well. So explore these, read the preamble, read the articles, and just get an understanding for the opening portion of the U.S. Constitution. You're free to read the document in its entirety. However, we will be focusing on the preamble and articles 1 through 7 this week. Future lessons are going to focus on the Bill of Rights and Amendments 11 through 27, however. After you read the Constitution, click on the link for the comparison of Constitution and the Articles of Confederation. You will probably note these as you're reading through the Constitution, but this gives you a nice little list about how the differences that exist between these two documents, such as under the Articles of Confederation, the states were sovereign, whereas under the Constitution, the people of the whole nation were sovereign, and the exercise of sovereignty is divided between the states and the central government. So take a look through that list and consider those points. After you read these two links, you're going to have a number of blurbs from the Founding Fathers about the creation of the U.S. Constitution. You'll read words from Benjamin Franklin and George Washington. From there, you'll move on to read James Madison's words on the separation of powers and why they exist. Next, you'll look at Alexander Hamilton's words on the executive office and why it functions as it does. You'll also read his thoughts on the judicial branch of government, the one he labeled the least dangerous branch. And as you read about that least dangerous branch, think of it this way. Do you think that today we would label the Supreme Court, our justices, as the least dangerous branch today? Do you think that's something that all Americans today would agree with? And maybe even as you're reading these words, think about it this way. Do you think that Alexander Hamilton's contemporaries would have thought the same way about his words as he did, or was there room for disagreement? Finally, you'll read words from Thomas Jefferson about the amendments. Now, we're not going to be talking about amendments yet. In fact, there was even a belief that it might not be necessary to have amendments in the Constitution. Indeed, there was the belief that a Bill of Rights was not necessary. That's something we're going to be talking about more in depth next week, but I wanted you to consider Jefferson's words this week as you go through. So read those points. They're all rather short in length, so it's not a massive reading assignment, although I definitely know it appears that way. And once you do the readings, move into this week's discussion. There are 3 points as usual. You'll pick one to discuss in your own post, 1 to 2 to 3 paragraphs, and then you'll respond to 2 others with on the board. The first question asks you, what experiences and fears led to the establishment of the separation of powers within the U.S. Constitution? We've already talked about that a little last week, so expand upon it in this week's reading if you choose this question. The next point, how did the founders view their role in creating the Constitution? And the final point, how did the U.S. Constitution differ from the Articles of Confederation and why? So as you see, we're building on what we've learned in the previous weeks. Another thing I wanted to tell you as a class before you move on and begin the work for this week is that I was really pleased with how everyone, when you all were talking about modern day politics and were providing examples and we're tying fears from the past to fears of the present concerning government, particularly central government, I appreciated that everyone remained measured in their responses and they remained respectful with one another, even if they were voicing a very specific political opinion of their own or if you were commenting on someone else's. This is exactly the type of discussion I want to see in this class and that I'm very happy to see, and you all should be proud of the discussions that you are having. As always, if you have any questions this week, please do not hesitate to contact me, and I look forward to seeing your posts on the U.S. Constitution.